In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligations to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development and administration of these schools. Two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their home, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture.
Dating from the 1870s to 1996, more than 180,000 Aboriginal children across Canada were forced to live inside of a residential school. Imagine being a child and left inside of a school where the main purpose is to assimilate you to their culture. Mary St. Clair, the chairman of Truth and Reconciliation, has once called these residential school policy a cultural genocide. After searching many stories about this subject, I came across St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany. Many residential schools across Canada were operated by the missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate, including St. Anne's Residential School. We shall await your reply before making any definite decision on the plan in which your fathers are particularly interested, because it would open the door for them to the mission among the native peoples and put them within reach of helping our people in the work camps, who are particularly in need of religious assistance. If they are sheep of the house of Israel, they are surely these poor people whose faith and feeling of their spiritual poverty is the only thing they have to share. Located at Fort Albany on the west side of James Bay, St. Anne's Residential School was the only Catholic school in the area. The application form had a small amount of information on the applicants. The name was already translated into English, and the child was considered as Roman Catholic, even if the individual was attending a residential school for the first time. When a child was introduced into the school, he was considered as a pupil, and his name was replaced by a number. Separated into a half-day system, the students attended class on the first half and carried out other activities during the other half. Boys were responsible for certain chores and manual labor around the school. The girls were responsible for the domestic chores such as sewing and mending. Being in a remote territory, Fort Albany was a hard place to reach, which caused many problems. During the 1930s, the Ontario Northline Railway was finally constructed, making the accessibility much easier. In 1932, Russell T. Perrier, the Superintendent of Indians Education, sent this letter to the chief of the Albany Indian Band, stating, quote, "The railway to Moosonee and changing conditions generally make it very desirable that the younger generation of Indians have an elementary schooling." During the years of St. Anne's Residential School, the lack of resources was a constant struggle. The extra cost of being in a remote territory limited the ability to take good care of the students who attended the facility. These legal documents demonstrate the strict rules from the government refusing to pay the cost of certain merchandise. Although this educational system was believed to be a source and a tool of prosperity and evolution for the Indian communities, St. Anne's Residential School, like many other residential schools across Canada, were part of many tragedies which caused a world of suffer for many generations of Indians.
What was life like at St. Anne's as you saw it and experienced it?
It was pretty rough. I spent 8 years in St. Anne's. I thought it was rough to be there because you encounter a lot of harshness, harsh discipline, very harsh, and also a very demeaning activities imposed on you. Would you consider feeding your vomit to a 6-year-old child, which I was forced to do? To make it worse,
forced to eat vomit.
It was a 3-day-old because I had a flu or something. I got sick and I threw up in my bowl of porridge. And when I got better on the 4th day, they brought back that porridge to me and I had to finish it. No choice, no one to defend me. And
you were 6.
Other people talk about doing it 20 times. I thought once was bad, but 20 times over and over again, what the worst about the thing is the vileness of it, the thought of it, of doing that, and you're defenseless.
Your feet is flying around in front of you, and that was funny for the missionaries. So all you hear is that jolt of electricity, and your reaction and laughter at the same time. We all took turns sitting on it. Dear Bishop Bettle, I am very much worried over a report that has just been received from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The department should have been notified immediately. Any unusual event at a school, especially when the results are fatal, should be immediately brought to the department's attention. The boys were never found, and no one was made accountable for their disappearance. We apologize for the part we played in the cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious imperialists that was part of the mentality with which the peoples of Europe first met the Aboriginal peoples, and which consistently has lurked behind the way the native people of Canada have been treated by civil governments and by the churches. We were naively part of this mentality and were in fact often a key player in its implementation. We recognize that this mentality has from the beginning and ever since continually threatened the cultural, linguistic, and religious traditions of the native peoples.
Regrettably, many former students are not with us today, and died never having received a full apology from the Government of Canada. The absence of an apology has been an impediment to healing and reconciliation. Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, I stand before you in this chamber so vital, so central to our existence as a country, to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for the role the Government of Canada played in the Indian residential schools.
On January 25, 2016, this letter was sent by Douglas Crosby to Bishop of Hamilton towards the Superior General of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate in Italy. Arriving in Canada in 1841, at the request of Bishop Ignace Bourget of Montreal, the Oblates began an important era of evangelization for the country, most especially during the opening of the West. The Oblates worked closely with the indigenous peoples, learning their many languages and preparing dictionaries and grammars, assuring that some of these languages would survive the arrival of European settlers and continue into our time. As missionaries, Oblates, priests, and brothers were not afraid to travel to the more remote communities in the northern part of the country, often giving their lives for the people entrusted to their care. Names of the Oblate missionaries are given to cities, towns, parks, and streets across the country.
Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, as Cindy Blackstock says, Indigenous children have waited too long for justice in this country and they want action now. Unfortunately, the pattern of systemic discrimination continues to be the operating culture within various government departments today. For example, Cindy Blackstock's identified Michael Wernick as a key player in fighting her human rights case. He was also lambasted by parliamentary committee by dragging his feet on the child welfare crisis. For reconciliation to be real, action must be louder than words. So what kind of message is the Prime Minister sending to Indigenous families by appointing Mr. Wernick to oversee the entire civil service?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
I thank the member for his question and I thank him for his work on behalf of Indigenous people, but I think that he must understand that the public service in this country's primary goal is loyal implementation. There is a new government here and the Clerk of the Privy Council is empowered to deliver the work that we have promised in the past election, and he will do it.